The story starts with the main character named Ravenna drowning in a frozen lake, and her hands were tied. But for some reason, she didn't remember how it happened. Her memory? There were only snippets. She remembered that there was a cursed creature that killed her mom and killed everyone in her town. The main character ran for help, but the creature found her faster. After that, it attacked her, and all other memories were like a blur. The girl also remembered how she was accused of being a witch, and then ordered her to tie her hands together so she wouldn't be able to do magic. But Ravenna didn't understand how that could happen, because she had never had any magical abilities until then. A few months had passed since the drowning, and she had to learn a lot to survive. She learned the most important lesson of all, which is that people are incredibly stupid. Ravenna walked into a bar and heard people discussing the latest rumors. A man said he had overheard the Imperial Guards running down the street earlier, and they were talking about how several soldiers were frozen solid, but they were all alive, and it was all done by a dragon. The interlocutor was very surprised and asked what dragon he was talking about. The man replied that it came from the mountains, which is north of here. The dragon attacked the soldiers but didn't kill them, and it breathed or ice fire. When Ravenna heard this, she could not believe it. The man said that, as the legend said, but there was no way he would believe that the existence of a dragon, and maybe it was a wizard who plunged them into an illusion. The protagonist thought about this information and was sure that these are not simple tall tales, because her mother told her about them when she was a little girl. In the legend, there was a story about brave knights, a beautiful princess in confinement, and a terrible evil dragon with his witchcraft tricks. But anyway, even if it was a dragon, it had control over magic and could eventually use it, and Ravenna couldn't do that. But maybe he could become her teacher. The protagonist set out to find the dragon, but finding the mythical creature wasn't as easy as she thought. Ravenna spent 4 days looking for this overgrown lizard and found nothing. And at some point, she even began to doubt that the dragon even exists. But if you think about it, what did Ravenna expect since dragons are almost all extinct? Suddenly, she heard a crunch and saw that she had stepped on someone's tail. It was a lizard who asked indignantly where the wretched mortal was going, for her kind always had the clumsy gait of a giant. Ravenna replied that she had been told that she had the gait of a beautiful princess. The lizard said that whoever told her that was lying. The protagonist thought that that particular compliment on her gait had come from a drunk, but it was a compliment nonetheless. Ravenna replied that the lizard was just angry that the girl had stepped on her. The lizard said that, by the way, Ravenna still owed Ravenna an apology for her act. The girl got angry and asked why she should apologize to the lizard, since she had only insulted the girl. The lizard warned Ravenna to be careful about calling her a mortal. The girl replied that if she thought she was talking to a mere mortal, the lizard was mistaken. The lizard said that if Ravenna thought she was talking to an ordinary enchanted reptile, then she was wrong too. And at that moment, the lizard began to turn into a huge dragon. The protagonist was frightened because she realized that she had angered the dragon, and so she had only 2 choices. Either she would defeat the lizard and lose the chance to learn to control her power, or he would kill her. Ravenna was strong, but she couldn't stand up to the dragon, and she couldn't wait to go to the other world again. But suddenly, she realized what she was saying, because she had come very far, and of course she didn't want to die. Ravenna turned to the dragon and shouted that it could not kill her. The dragon leaned closer to her and asked her why she thought that. The main character decided that she had a chance since the dragon didn't attack her right away, and so the girl decided to take that chance. The girl told the dragon that she had heard that he could control the ice, so she offered to prove it to him and directed her power at him. But suddenly, the dragon disappeared. Ravenna shouted into the void for the dragon to come back, because if it didn't, it would be considered a coward. The dragon asked the girl why she was doing this. Ravenna replied that she was looking for him and had heard rumors that he had turned Imperial soldiers into ice. The dragon said that was a very interesting accusation. Ravenna turned to the dragon and said she needed him to learn how to control her magical abilities. The girl could defend herself, but she needed the dragon's help because she couldn't do it on her own, because Ravenna couldn't stop her own power and couldn't do anything but kill someone with it. One day, Ravenna was walking down the street and a guard started pestering her and asked her what such a pretty girl was doing on the street at such a late hour. Ravenna replied that it was none of his business and decided that she needed to get the hell out of here before the guard did something stupid. The guard stopped Ravenna and said that someone who wanders the streets and hides under a dark cloak can be considered a threat, and he must be sure that she is not a criminal or a witch because his job is to protect the streets of the city. The girl replied that he was doing an excellent job, and she was sure that the emperor's soldiers had a lot of important things to do that could not be neglected, especially at this late hour. But suddenly, the guard grabbed her arm and pinned her against the wall and told her that if she screamed, he would have to kill her. Ravenna was very scared, and so she used her magic in self-defense and failed to control it, after which the guardian was covered in ice as an ice statue. The dragon, after listening to her story, said that he saw nothing wrong with the situation. Ravenna replied that she didn't want to kill people, even if they were cruel. She never wanted to kill them, because she wasn't a killer. The dragon replied that when she felt threatened, her magical powers were her first defense, and in the end, she was ready to kill the dragon if he became a threat to her life. The girl screamed and said that it didn't matter since he had turned into a huge dragon, and it was fair to assume that he would attack her first. The dragon replied that she knew nothing of his intentions, but still decided to provoke and attack him, and it was natural for her to decide that his potential killing was justified. Ravenna replied that it was only self-defense. The dragon replied that if she needed a teacher, here was her first lesson, after which he grabbed her in his paws and said that killing could only be justified self-defense if her enemy attacked her or wanted to harm her. But he never once threatened the girl. The dragon flew up with the girl, causing her to be afraid that she was going to die and started screaming for him to let her go. The dragon complied with her request and let her go, causing her to fly down from the height and fall into a snowdrift that she had made using her magic. The dragon said that she had caused it to snow and that had cushioned her fall, but now the foolish mortals would blame him for the terrible blizzard. Ravenna replied that it was his own fault because he threw her down. The dragon replied that she asked him to let her go, and he did. And now he was angry because he honored her request. Ravenna said that she asked him to let her go to Earth and asked if he would teach her. Then the dragon asked how she was cursed. The girl replied that she didn't remember, and all her knowledge was limited to stories she had heard, and it turns out that his town was exterminated by a witch who was her, so the people killed her but didn't curse her. The dragon replied that only some people can manage curses like that, and most of the time they are the only ones who can break them, and added that Ravenna had a very unusual case. The girl thought that if people from her village used black magic, and they were the reason why she was like this. The dragon reincarnated into the image of a human and taught her a second lesson, which was that humans don't care who first attacked the whole. She will always be a threat, so killing humans will always be justified, and in their world, creatures like them will always be monsters. The dragon then told her to follow him, for it was not far to her destination here. Ravenna wondered where he was taking her, and after all, after his flying antics, she wanted to make sure he wouldn't hurt her, so she asked him if he would train her. The guy called her stupid and asked what else he had to do to make it obvious to her. She answered that he should watch his language because she is not stupid, but just doesn't trust him. And then she asked him again where he was taking her. The dragon answered that she was not stupid because he was going to train her, but not in the forest in the open where there were a lot of hunters with sharp swords and arrows. The girl thought that if she really wanted to learn something from him, she should trust him. After a while, they came to the cabin that was the dragon's residence. The girl was very surprised because she thought he was a simple dragon living in the forest and told him that he was full of surprises and what kind of place it was. The guy replied that he had told her he lived here and offered to make himself comfortable. "Thank you. She has ears, and why is he being so rude?" Ravenna said she realized he lived here, she was surprised that this was his home and asked why he became human. The dragon replied that his other form was not to the girl's liking, especially when he tried to bring her here. Ravenna replied that it was all just very strange, because at first she thought he couldn't stand humans. The boy replied that he despised them, but found their hands quite useful, and since his other forms didn't have dexterous fingers, he had to keep his human form for the duration of his work. Ravenna asked what he was working on, and the dragon replied that he was working on a simple spell. At this point, the girl began to slowly fall asleep, mouthing the words that she still couldn't trust him. After a while, Ravenna woke up, and couldn't understand how she had managed to fall asleep and saw the dragon across from her, who had also dozed off. The girl felt that she couldn't move, and suddenly memories of that very night came over her. The image of a wolf with red eyes and how the guards tried to throw her into the river saying she was a witch appeared before her eyes. At some point, Ravenna was able to move again, or the dragon confirmed her words, which made the girl afraid of its sudden appearance. The girl remembered the creature she had seen in her memories, but she didn't recall any such thing, or maybe it was just a nightmare. Ravenna saw the dragon preparing some potion that smelled like rotten eggs. Then she looked in the book that had the recipe for the potion and saw that it was called a healing spell and a protection spell. The girl wondered why such a powerful dragon would need all these spells. Because they're not for beginners. OMG, and do you have to get so annoyed? Suddenly the dragon said that Ravenna's dress was torn. Then the girl looked at her stomach and indeed saw that her dress was torn and there was a wound on that spot, but she didn't even notice it. The girl remembered the vision in which she was attacked, but thought about the fact that it was just a dream. The dragon dipped his hand into the potion cauldron and took some ointment from it and wanted to smear it on the girl's wounds. But Ravenna grabbed his hand and angrily asked him what he was doing. The dragon replied that he just wanted to help her, but if she didn't want to, there was a chance that the wounds would fester. The girl let go of his hand and let him help himself because the consequences could have been really sad. After the guy finished, he said he needed to go gather more herbs, and once the ointment was absorbed, the girl could wash and change her clothes. When Ravenna heard this, she thought about how she didn't want to be alone because she was afraid something creature would come back. But still, she convinced herself that it was just a nightmare. When the dragon left, the girl was surprised that he just left like that. But even so, he must have brewed this potion especially for her, and that was very nice of him. At some point, the girl caught herself thinking about it and realized how she could think of such a thing because she couldn't be so stupid, and she couldn't trust anyone either. Ravenna was angry with herself and grabbed a bucket and started pouring water into it, saying that he was a ruthless dragon and he had made this ointment just to get the girl's blood on his sex. When Ravenna washed and changed her clothes, she noticed that the dress he had given her was too dressy and she was afraid she would ruin it. At that moment, the dragon came and replied that he didn't think she would ruin the dress. The girl was frightened and asked how long he had been back. The guy replied that he had been back long enough and asked how Ravenna was feeling. The protagonist replied that she felt pissed off and asked when he even had time to come in and if he was following her, calling him a pervert. The dragon replied that her pathetic insults and now to the good will not bring the girl, shouted that he did not change the subject because he was watching her change clothes. And what kind of man is he who invades the personal space of an innocent girl? The guy asked her if she really thought he was interested in watching her change clothes, and so that she wouldn't forget that he wanted to help her. Even though he could have killed her, he asked what part of her shameless brain didn't understand that. Ravenna angrily repeated his words that pathetic insults wouldn't do him any good. At that moment, the dragon threw a glass at her, and Ravenna involuntarily used her powers, and the glass shattered, then asked angrily what that was. The dragon answered that it was just a simple test, and that she should not get so excited, and invited her to go with him to the training. After a while, they went outside, and the dragon took off his sweater. The girl was very embarrassed, but didn't show it, and then said that it was time to really learn something new. The boy asked that she hadn't learned anything new yet. Ravenna answered that she meant magic, because he hadn't taught her anything in his hut. The dragon replied that the humans were really as stupid as they were said to be. The girl asked if he wanted to explain himself, but the guy said he didn't, and the girl got angry, saying that he was just playing with her. At that moment, the dragon used his magic and disappeared somewhere, causing Ravenna to lose sight of him, noticing that he was too fast. At some point, a shard of ice struck the girl and the dragon was behind her back. Ravenna turned around sharply and angrily asked what he was doing and started using her magic against the dragon. The boy asked if she still hadn't learned anything. The girl asked what exactly he meant, since all he had done so far was throw various objects at her and what he thought she should have learned. The dragon replied that he had already learned something interesting from her magic, and the first lesson she should learn is that in the middle of a battle, she should keep an eye on her opponent, because Ravenna almost immediately lost sight of his movements, and that shouldn't happen unless she wants to die in the first second. And secondly, Ravenna controls ice best when she is angry because her ice movement is subconscious. But if she doesn't watch her opponent, her ice doesn't see him. The girl recognized that he was right and asked how to fix it. At this point, he moved closer to Ravenna and placed his finger on the girl's lip. The protagonist indignantly asked what he was doing, and the dragon replied that one more wish was not the best thing for her, because heaven forbid her to see her opponent as an attractive object. Otherwise, her magic would be completely powerless. The girl thought about the fact that I already have him able to read minds and told him to stay on the topic by asking how she could stop being distracted. The dragon smirked and told her to be observant until she could do that. Then he had nothing to do with her. Ravenna was left alone and couldn't believe he just left her here, remembering what he said about her needing more attention, not realizing what he even meant. The protagonist decided that she too could be observant and started to look around and saw the leaves, driven by the afternoon breeze, the birds, which soared from branch to branch, the deer, which was on the edge of the forest, and the girl saw and heard everything going on around her. And just when she thought she was really observant, then suddenly a caterpillar jumped on her and Ravenna was very frightened. And as much as the girl didn't want to admit it, the dragon was right. And maybe she should really take a closer look at what was around her, even though some part of her didn't even want to see the dragon. She looked out the window and saw him, and thought about how arrogant he was, and that whatever she did, she would get a smirk and a compliment on her intelligence. Ravenna decided to let it go at that, because the damn dragon had really taught her a thing or two, at least if she wanted to fight someone. When the girl entered the house, she saw him working on another spell, and suddenly she saw a stack of books, and thought that maybe there was a spell that could help her become more attentive, because if such a spell really existed, that would be great. Suddenly the guy told her that she wouldn't find what she was looking for there, which made Ravenna very scared, and asked what that meant. The dragon asked that she thought that a spell would solve her problem, but none of those books had what she was looking for, and so he would recommend her a good bookstore on the other side of the forest. There was a town, and there the girl would be able to find what she was looking for. Ravenna replied that most towns have stores with rather poor stock, and she didn't have the money to buy a decent book. The dragon, he replied that no one had told her that she had to pay for this book. The girl thought that he was suggesting that she steal the book. She had never stolen anything before, but it probably wouldn't be too difficult, and the girl was sure that it wouldn't take her long to set off. Ravenna asked how far it was to the city, and the boy said it was half a day's walk. The girl thought that it wasn't that far, but she didn't want it to be like the last time she ran into an imperial guard at night. But she had to stay calm and not prepare for the worst. The dragon wished her luck and warned her that all problems were solved by spells. As the protagonist walked into town, she thought that since the dragon wasn't going to tell her what it meant to be observant, she would have to find out for herself. But if she had known that the journey would take so long, she would have waited until morning, because there are evil spirits and hungry trolls in this forest, and she could meet any enemy. At last, the protagonist began to approach the city and saw the guards, and was sure that she would be able to deal with them. When Ravenna approached the gate, the guard smiled at her and wished her a good morning and quietly let her into the city. She was surprised and decided that maybe she was just very lucky, but for now, she needed to be as quiet as possible. But there were a lot of people here who were very friendly and offered her all sorts of goodies. The girl offered Ravenna a taste of their pastries, but the protagonist thanked her and said that she was looking for a bookstore. The girl replied that the bookstore was down the street, which was the best in their town. Ravenna noticed that everyone in this town was unnaturally friendly, and she had never met such friendly people before, or maybe they saw through her and realized who she was, and maybe they were just waiting for the imperial guards to show up and arrest her, or maybe there really are such kind people in the world after all. When Ravenna arrived at the librarian greeted her and asked if there was anything he could do to help. She couldn't just say that she needed books on witchcraft, so she said that she wanted to look around for a while. The librarian smiled and told the girl not to be shy and to tell him in case she needed help. The man inspired confidence in Ravenna, so she could steal the book now and he might not even notice. But now that she thought about it, something told her that it might not be the only book she needed. After a while, she still hadn't found the book she wanted, but the dragon wouldn't send her to find something that didn't exist, so she decided to ask the librarian about the book. Besides, he was just a plain old man, and even if he tried to attack her and do her some harm, she could defend herself. Ravenna turned to the man, and going in from afar said that she was looking for a way to become more attentive because her leave mentioned that a spell could help her and asked if they had any spell books. When the man heard this, he was very surprised, and at that moment the girl's whole life ran before her eyes because she thought that she would be burned at the stake as a witch and that she would not mention magic at all. So the girl decided that she had to get out of here before he called the guards. But the librarian thought for a while and said that he had not seen such books for a long time, because most of the time wizards and sorceresses do not like to share them. Ravenna was surprised and asked if he wasn't going to attack her or call the guards. The man smiled and asked why do that, since it was obvious she was a witch and could easily deal with him even if he tried anything, so he preferred life well most of the time. The girl thought about the fact that even though he knows she could be a threat, he is surprisingly completely calm. The librarian found some scrolls and handed them to Ravenna, saying it was all he had left. The man added that once upon a time there had been an old wizard living near him, and he had been the main source of all the sorceress material. But for some reason he hadn't heard from him in a long time, and he hoped he was doing well. The girl was very glad that he had provided her with these materials. The man handed her a scroll and told her that it was a spell to detect treasure. But the girl replied that it was not the spell she was looking for, but it was closer. Ravenna realized that he was really trying to help her, and it seemed very nice to her. The girl asked the librarian that are all the inhabitants so friendly to sorceresses? The man replied that she should avoid an old man named Henry, because he had a personal grudge against the wizard he had told her about earlier, something to do with cheating at a game or something, but he didn't really complain about people like the girl. Ravenna thanked him for his concern and said that she would try to keep out of his sight and thought that maybe this town wasn't so bad after all. After the girl left the library, she couldn't believe that the librarian let her take all these things and she didn't even have to pay for them. After Ravenna read all the scrolls, she found out that one of the spells was for cleaning and the other one was for changing hair color. But unfortunately, neither of them could solve her problem. Suddenly, a girl approached the protagonist and Ravenna was very scared, so she accidentally used her magic against her, but luckily the girl was unharmed. Ravenna warned the girl that she shouldn't sneak up on her like that because she could get hurt. The girl apologized and said she didn't mean to scare her. Ravenna thought about what this girl was doing on the street at this hour. It was not unusual for children to wander the streets, but even the homeless would have found shelter long ago. So Ravenna decided to ask the girl where her parents were. The girl replied that her dad and mom were long gone and wondered what the scrolls were. Ravenna answered that it was a spell so she should be careful because she could accidentally activate it, and she didn't want to be turned into a frog. But something was wrong with this girl. The girl asked Ravenna if she didn't know that magic was bad because her mom told her that doing the right thing only makes you evil. And at that moment, Ravenna noticed that her eyes were empty, that is dead. The girl asked the main character if she could play with her to play with her, because others do not let her. Ravenna was very scared when she saw the girl's eyes, but suddenly a guard asked if she was all right. Ravenna looked in the girl's direction, but she wasn't there and said she was fine. The girl wished the dragon was here so he would know what to do. The guard said that in that case the girl should be careful because the spirits like to visit this part of town at night, and all the spirits are friendly. But suddenly, the guard looked closely into the girl's eyes and asked if she was new here. Ravenna was afraid that he would start harassing her again, but surprisingly, the guard said that if she was looking for a place to stay, Alva's Tavern was right around the corner, and that it had the softest bed and the best food in town. Whereupon, the guard wished her a pleasant night's sleep and left. Ravenna was surprised that he didn't bother her, but just left, because it was the first time she had ever been here. She went to Alva's Tavern, and when she saw it, she remembered that the last time she had been there had been some fighting and it had not ended well. Ravenna managed to force herself to go inside after all. It was better than being out on the street alone with the ghost of that little girl. Everyone was having fun in the tavern, but Ravenna thought that maybe that little girl was probably waiting for her outside, and maybe she was following her. The girl then approached the man and said she needed a room. Ravenna noticed that there was something off about the man, but she couldn't figure out what, and asked who she could talk to about it. The man replied that she could talk to him because he was Vasis, the owner of this nice little place, and the charge here was 10 coins a night. The girl was surprised that it was quite cheap here, but she was sorry to give even 1 coin from her reserves. When Vasis the girl then, he said he could give a discount especially to such a nice girl, although it might cost her something else. Ravenna couldn't believe her ears, and was disappointed that it was just another pervert, and said she didn't need the discount and threw him the money. Suddenly, a boy named Liv came in and told the girl to follow him. But Vasis told the boy that he would escort the girl himself, and he would watch the bar. Vasis then told the girl to follow him because he could walk her to her room. Ravenna thought that this weirdo thought that she was easy prey, but she could stop his flirting with one hand, and no man in the tavern could stop her. But she couldn't do it without controlling her powers, because there was a chance that she could kill him. Besides, Ravenna didn't feel like looking for another inn, so she followed the man. When they reached Ravenna's room, Vasis asked her how long she would be here, and she said that she hadn't decided yet. The girl noticed that Vasis still hadn't left and asked if it was time for him to go back to work. The man replied that it wasn't common to see a wandering traveler in their town, so he decided to ask her what had brought her here. First, this guy tried to flirt, and now he was asking her what he cared about. Ravenna replied that she would prefer to keep that information to herself, and if he didn't mind, she would like to rest because she had had a hard day today. Vasis said that he just wanted to ask her to refrain from using those little spells in his tavern. There was a reason why she wasn't bothered by the music and shouting from the bar, and he wanted her to stay after all. Suddenly, the girl noticed that the floor was enchanted, which meant that this man could also cast spells, so she replied that he had nothing to worry about since she was just doing research. Vasis replied that he was glad to hear that, and if she needed anything, she could just call him, and he closed the door behind him. Ravenna thought that this was all very strange, because she bet she had seen fangs, but she tried to convince herself that she was just imagining it, and that she was probably tired. Her body felt like it was lead for the summer and she could use some rest. She lay down on the bed and fell asleep immediately, thinking that there was something about this man that was probably familiar. Ravenna woke up the next morning and thought that maybe now in the daylight, the little ghost wouldn't bother her, because she wanted to finish reading in silence. It was perfect. The store should be closing soon, and the owner had mentioned that he would have more of these scrolls today. After studying a few scrolls, she saw a generalized self-help spell, and it might be the only spell that remotely resembled what she needed, but the girl didn't think it would be enough. Suddenly, the smell of delicious food wafted up to Ravenna, and it smelled warm. The girl even remembered her mom when she made the most delicious pastries in town, and her happiest memories were of the days when she helped her cook. Ravenna headed downstairs immediately Vasis saw her and asked what he could make her happy for breakfast. Ravenna asked what they had of the cheapest dishes since she didn't have much money to spend. Vasis replied that it was all nonsense because breakfast was always on the house, especially for a pretty girl like her. She asked if she didn't have teeth or acne on her face. Would she really have to pay for the food? Vasis replied that it depends on the person, and he could get over not having a couple teeth. But if her sweet speeches could make up for it, then he could turn a blind eye to it. Ravenna replied that she assumes her looks override her unkind behavior, and she knows she's not particularly friendly. The man said that he was inclined to argue, since he found her quite pleasing to both eyes and ears, after which he handed her a plate and wished her a pleasant appetite. The girl thought to herself that it was a disappointment for her because she was expecting to see some of the pastries just like her mother's. Suddenly, Ravenna realized that he had used a spell to get them all out, and Vasis realized that the girl had noticed it. Ravenna replied that she wouldn't have left her room otherwise, and Vasis replied that he already knew that. The girl thought that she had seen a similar spell on one of the scrolls, and it filled its victim with the warmest memories associated with food, and thus made even the pickiest eater feel hungry. And so it explained such a sudden memory of her mother. Vasis said he hoped the spell didn't interfere too much with her, just he wanted to see her pretty face again. Ravenna thought about the fact that it certainly wasn't her mom's food, but it was still pretty good nonetheless. Besides, she hadn't eaten anything in a long time because she had no need for one for her, but the food made her feel alive. After a while, the girl thanked the owner for breakfast and was about to leave. Vasis asked if she was leaving so soon, and the girl replied that she would be back closer to evening. Even this early in the day, the city was already alive and the bookstore was probably open. The girl noticed that for some reason all the people were more friendly to her, and even Vasis, despite his obvious flaws, didn't seem so bad. So Ravenna didn't feel anxious anymore. The girl also smiled at everyone and wished them a good morning that maybe people weren't so bad anymore. The protagonist came to the bookstore and noticed that the door was unlocked, but she didn't see the owner here again. But suddenly, the librarian appeared from behind the books, calling the girl a mysterious witch, and said that he felt she would come back. Ravenna thanked the man for the scrolls and said she had come to return them. The librarian asked if they didn't help her solve her question. The girl said no. The man said he was afraid of that because he didn't have much material on spells of that kind, and most of the people who came here looking for spells if they were up to no good. At that moment, Ravenna wondered if she'd been mistaken about his benevolence, and a small shiver ran through her body. The librarian told her not to worry because he had a good feeling about her, and that when she left yesterday, he realized how useless he had been when someone wanted to know more about the art of magic. So he decided to contact his friends who owned bookstores all over the country. One by one, his friends in the librarian came out to the local wizards and sorcerers, and he woke up to find a large amount of reading material. The girl was very happy because it was all books with spells, and asked him if all this had come to him in just one night, which was impossible because one person could not have brought it all. The librarian replied that there were spells for it all, so he suggested she start with this pile and he would look at the second one. If they worked together, he believed they would be done with it by lunchtime. As Ravenna and the librarian went through the books and scrolls together, before they knew it, night had fallen. But there was still so much she wanted to review. When the man saw the girl's confusion, he said she could take some scrolls with her for the night, or return tomorrow morning. Ravenna was glad and took some scrolls with her, and then thanked him and told him that she would be back tomorrow morning. The girl couldn't believe that she had lost track of time. She planned to be back before dusk, and she knows she can take care of herself. But she hoped that they would meet that little girl again. When Ravenna returned to the tavern, she saw that everyone was celebrating something, and so she decided to ask Vasis about it. He asked her if she had decided to join their celebration. Ravenna asked what kind of celebration they were talking about. The tavern owner replied that the birdberry was finally blooming. The birdberry blooms with the coming of winter, and it symbolizes the end of the harvest. This holiday is usually celebrated in farming towns like this, and of course he would understand if she had never heard of it. Ravenna replied that once upon a time in her town, they celebrated this holiday and bought the birdberry bouquet. The flower was so strange because as a child, she had always thought them very beautiful, and her mother often said they brought good luck. Vasis said that birdberries always made her happy, and that winter was his favorite season. The girl thought that she was happy that he wasn't trying to flirt with her, and noticed that everyone was having a lot of fun, and the more time she spent in this town, the less pressure she felt. Ravenna noticed that it was as if she was a different person for the first time since she had woken up. She felt happy. When everyone had had enough of celebrating, Vasis said she should go to her bed and get some rest. Ravenna slowly went to her room and thought about how much fun she was having, and how she had no control issues all night long. So she thought that maybe she shouldn't go back after all. The dragon didn't even care about her, and probably wouldn't care even if she didn't come back. When Ravenna returned to her room, she was horrified to see the ghost girl there, and how she had gotten into her room in the first place. The girl said that she would die in this room because this room would kill her because it was cursed. Ravenna started to get angry, and her powers started to awaken involuntarily, and asked if that was a threat. The girl's abilities began to grow stronger and stronger, and after a while the girl disappeared, maybe even forever. Ravenna couldn't understand how she did it, and wondered to the void how she could have gotten here in the first place. Suddenly the voice of her master was heard behind her back. The girl turned around, and when Vasis saw her tears, he asked worriedly what was wrong. Ravenna thought about how she could have been so stupid. She had almost destroyed this place, and almost unleashed her magic all because of that stupid ghost. The girl replied that she was fine not to worry, but she was crying herself. Vasis reached out his hand to her face and said that she seemed upset, and asked why she was crying or if someone had hurt her. Ravenna didn't know what to say to him, because she didn't know if he had seen the girl's ghost, or if she could trust him at all. But she couldn't think straight, and didn't want to tell him about the girl, because she couldn't just blurt out that she wasn't human. Vasis said to look at him, and at that moment Ravenna didn't feel afraid anymore. And then Vasis asked who she was, and the girl answered without a doubt that she wasn't human. And at that moment, Ravenna realized what she said, but she didn't want to say it. And she didn't know how it happened at all. Vasis said that he wasn't human either, and the girl couldn't analyze this information because she was dizzy and couldn't focus. But it made sense that he had used magic this morning. Ravenna asked the man what he was doing with her point. Vasis replied that he thought she had had a little too much to drink tonight and needed to rest. The girl realized that he was trying to distract her, and at that moment, the girl thought that how dare he lead her by the hand, as if she was incapable of walking on her own. Suddenly, Ravenna said she was thinking perfectly, and here was a little ghost girl. Vasis worriedly asked what this ghost wanted. The girl replied that the little girl said that she would die here in this room, and she also said that this room was cursed and that someone would kill her. Suddenly, Vasis approached the girl and told her that she was talking nonsense because there was no curse and no one would kill anyone in these walls. Ravenna asked if anyone had ever died here. Vasis said that dawn was coming soon and that her headache would only get worse, and if she didn't go to bed now, it would get worse. The girl yanked her hand away and screamed that it wasn't true. Dello wished her sweet dreams and asked her not to mention the ghost to the other guests because he didn't want the town to be on edge just because she couldn't handle the effects of alcohol. When Vasis was leaving, she noticed that he had ears, and she was surprised. Or maybe it was just her imagination. Ravenna remembered that today her emotions had taken over and they were making her ice. Or maybe she was really a little drunk, or maybe she was just going crazy. Today's events knocked the girl out of her rut that she almost forgot why she was here because she needed to learn how to become more attentive, and the sooner she does it, the sooner she will get out of this place. It began to dawn that the girl thought that she would like to increase the chances that this city would survive her stay. In the morning, Ravenna noticed that she had a bad headache, and obviously it was because of the amount of alcohol she had drunk the previous night. But she wasn't going to just drink. Last night was the first time Ravenna had ever gotten so drunk, and she thinks it had a big effect on her. Even though she was dead last night, it was also hard for her to tell what was real and what was inspired by the effects of alcohol. But the eyes did seem very familiar to her, and so the girl was sure that she should get out of here as soon as possible. But for some reason she couldn't concentrate on anything, because her head was a mess, and even if she can't really remember anything, Vasis still make her nervous because she just doesn't know what to expect from him. When the protagonist passed by the bar, she saw Liv's boy who is in charge of the whole bar alone, and Ravenna felt sorry for this kid. Though the girl must admit that she was glad that Vasis wasn't around. Ravenna left the bar and greeted everyone and wished them a good morning. Then she went to the bookstore again because she was wondering what spells were waiting for her at this place. When the girl peeked through the doorway, she said hello to the library, but saw a strange man in a cloak next to it, and her expression changed immediately. The man said that he wanted to introduce the girl to someone, because this man was the main source of his magic scrolls. The man took off his hood, and Ravenna saw a dragon there and was dumbfounded. She didn't expect to see it here, and asked what it was doing here. The girl thought that it was him who was supplying the merchant with spells. The dragon said she was still as shallow as she was angry, and her magic almost spilled out. The librarian said they should act like adults, and then he went to the table where the red envelope was and told them to come closer, because he wanted to show them something. The dragon said that the girl seemed to be having trouble completing her assignments, and it was worse than he had originally thought. The librarian said that he had an incredibly detailed book of spells and that it was very old, and that according to their mutual friend, it belonged to one of the earliest sorcerers in the world, and that he believed that the girl would find the answer to her question here. Ravenna was glad, but when she opened it, she could hardly make out the page, and it was as if everything inside her was twisted. So she asked the dragon if he was sure that the spell was really here. He said he wasn't sure, but if the spell existed, it must be in this book, because most of the modern spells were another variation of the ones originally written in this book. The girl noticed that the ink in this book moved strangely, and it was strange, and even the strange feeling in her stomach went away on its own. But anyway, she didn't want to hang around with the dragon all day because he would criticize her every breath. Ravenna decided to ask the librarian if she could pick up the book. The man replied that of course she could, But she had to be very careful with it because ancient books, especially those written by wizards, could have minds. When Ravenna left the library, it started to rain because she didn't want the rain to spoil the book, but she didn't want to go to the tavern. Suddenly, the girl remembered that she could create her own shelter, and maybe not in the city, but in the forest it was possible. Ravenna went into the forest and covered everything around with snow and ice, and when she wanted to read the book, it wouldn't open anymore for some reason. The girl saw a clasp on the book that was definitely not there, and at that moment a dragon appeared and broke her hiding place. The protagonist told the dragon that he'd better let everyone know that she'd better not be scared like that. The dragon replied that she needed to be more careful, and because if she was careless, she could hurt someone else. The girl decided to ask why he was here, and he had already answered that question, namely that he had decided to intervene and help her since she was obviously unable to find the answer herself. Ravenna said that he didn't really care about it before, but now it suddenly became important to him. The dragon said that he liked the people of this town. The girl thought that it was unexpected because it was not like him at all. But then Ravenna realized what he was implying and said that she wouldn't touch a soul here because every person here was incredibly friendly to her. The dragon looked at the book and asked if she was going to open it. She thought that how could she open the book, which had closed by itself, but she decided to check it and found out that the clasp was not there because it seemed to have vanished somewhere and it was very strange. The protagonist asked if the merchant had not warned her about this because books can have minds that can close when they want to be read. The dragon said that in this way her assumption was correct because the book itself decides to whom and when to open its pages. But his advice contains other truths, because as he said, ancient spell books can have their own mind and magic. Sometimes it is difficult to control them. The girl asked if by chance this book could turn her into a frog. The dragon replied that he doubted that the book could turn her into an amphibian creature, or maybe a reptile, or even a chicken. But he also said that she would make a wonderful chicken. Ravenna looked at him angrily and said it wasn't funny, and the dragon said that he would not read this book in large quantities, for such an ancient book could be unpredictable. It was hard to tell how it could react to it and how it could affect him, because even he should open it with caution. The girl asked if he really thinks that the spells are in this book. The dragon answered that if such a spell exists, it will definitely be in this book. But the dragon also wanted to emphasize that her problem can hardly be solved by magic. The girl asked how it could be solved if not by magic. The boy said that it was not an easy question to answer, because gaining observation was a laborious process, and she had to try harder to focus and think. But she had already decided that magic was the answer. Ravenna thought that if magic didn't help, then he had let her go on this pointless journey in search of a spell, knowing that it was a no-go. Then she asked indignantly why he hadn't told her earlier and why he had to fool her. The dragon asked how else she would have learned anything if he had revealed all the cards to her right away. Ravenna asked why he would tell her now all he could do was let her continue blindly searching for a spell that might not even exist. The dragon replied that it was because he didn't want her to read that book unnecessarily. The girl was completely confused and asked why he had brought the book in the first place and given her a choice. The guy replied that he brought the book here to hide it because someone is after it. Ravenna asked if he would just leave the book with her like that. The dragon replied that he left it with her because her powers depend on emotions, and so she may subconsciously protect the book because she is emotionally unstable. Besides, not many people here know her, only a few would consider her to be involved in magic, and even if there are people who are looking for her, they would not realize that she has the book. Ravenna asked if it was more prudent to hide the book in his hut. The dragon replied that his hut had been discovered and it no longer existed, so they would now live in another place and it was in this city. The girl was surprised that they would be living together and told him so. The dragon asked if she really wanted to learn something from him. Ravenna answered that she didn't learn much from him. She couldn't learn control, but she thought she could understand what she needed to improve to learn how to control her powers. Plus, thanks to the magic scrolls, she had learned a couple spell relatives. So Ravenna replied that she wouldn't have been able to get too far without the dragon's help. The girl said that she was staying at Alva's tavern and her belongings were few, but she should at least thank the owner for letting her stay. The dragon said that they should get her things now, since it wasn't safe in the tavern at night. He then made an ice roof over them so the rain could not fall on them. Ravenna marveled at this and couldn't understand how she could learn to do the same thing when they got to town. The dragon asked the girl if she had already met Henry. Ravenna told him that the merchant had told her not to date him because he didn't like magic. Then the dragon snapped his finger, and all the cabbage that Henry was picking sprinkled on the floor, and the dragon said hello to him. Henry started to grumble, and so the girl said that was rude to him. The dragon asked Ravenna if she thought it was worse than stealing from her neighbors. The girl said, "What if he has nothing to eat and doesn't have money for food?" The guy said Henry was just a miserable old man and pointed to his vegetable garden, which was completely planted with vegetables. When they came to the tavern, the dragon said hello to Vesus, and he was very unhappy to see him. The girl couldn't understand why they were being looked at so strangely. The dragon left, and the girl couldn't understand what was going on, so she decided to ask. The boy answered that it was a very old place. The owner was older, and they didn't get along well. When they were walking to Ravenna's room, the dragon suddenly opened the door to her room. Ravenna was very surprised because she had never shown him where her room was, so she asked how he knew about it. The dragon smiled and replied that he guessed it by accident, then opened the door, and the girl looked around. Ravenna thought about how good it was that the ghost wasn't here, and now she just had to get her things and leave. As the dragon and the girl were leaving, Vesus gave them a leering look and turned to the dragon named Kalen. "Wow, he has a name?" Ravenna thanked Vesus for letting her stay here and thought about why the dragon had never told her his name either. Vesus said that she didn't have to leave, and besides, she knew that they had enough rooms where she could live, and so if she wasn't comfortable in her room, she could move to another one. The dragon said that he started to worry when his apprentice couldn't come back right away, but it seems that's why he thanked Vesus for looking after her. The innkeeper smiled and said it was his pleasure to look after her, and she would always be welcome here. When the protagonist was leaving, she noticed that Vesus had become very sad, but she couldn't stay in the inn either. The dragon and Ravenna had already left for the new house, and the girl thought that she had left in front of Vesus awkwardly, because it seemed to her that she had really left unexpectedly. And maybe he thought that she had chosen another inn because of the dragon. He was annoying her because all he does is test her patience and make her feel stupid. And after all, how could a teacher even send a student off to find something that probably isn't there? But if admittedly he looks like he has something to offer. Ravenna asked the dragon what she heard his name was Kalen, and that she didn't know he had a name. The dragon replied that she wasn't interested in his name, so he didn't tell her about it. After a while, they were nearing their destination, and the girl said that these houses seemed luxurious. The dragon replied that they were, because most of them were used as summer residences by the lords of the neighboring towns. Kalen then pointed to one of the houses and said that they would be staying here for a while. Ravenna noticed that it wasn't as elaborate as the others, but somehow seemed more cozy. When they entered the house, the rooms had not been cleaned for some time because he had to fire the servants. Ravenna asked why he had to fire her. The guy answered that she had tried to steal one of the artifacts he used as decorations, and in general, he didn't want to develop this topic. The girl thought that she would be interested to know what it was that the cleaning lady had tried to steal, and if after all this time he still held a grudge. Kalen said she could make herself at home, and he didn't know how much longer they would be here. But as long as they were here then, it would be hers, and so she could furnish it as she wished. Ravenna asked if he would mind if she put beautiful tapestries of the crown prince on all the walls. The dragon replied that if it would make her sleep better at night, it would be fine with him. Suddenly, Kalen decided to ask how Ravenna slept in the tavern. The girl asked what he was talking about, but the dragon replied that she should just ignore it, and if she needed anything, she could find it in the study. The girl realized that he definitely knew something about the tavern, and she wondered what he was hiding from her. And she also wondered if Kalen knew the story about the little ghost girl. After a while, Ravenna remembered that Kalen had told her that if she needed anything, she could come to his office. But the house was so big that she didn't understand why he had to live in that shack. When Ravenna came closer to his office and peered through the doorway, the dragon said that she had already gotten her nose where it didn't belong. She replied that curiosity was in her blood and there was nothing she could do about it, and then decided to ask a question to find out what the dragon meant when he asked her if she had slept well in the tavern. Kaylin said it was nothing much. Ravenna didn't like that and said that most likely he was hiding something from her. The dragon replied that he had many secrets. Surprisingly, he didn't even deny it, but still the girl wanted to know them as soon as possible. Ravenna said that when she was in the tavern, she had met a ghost. She had really had a bad dream. The dragon asked what the ghost looked like, and the girl said it was a little girl. When Kaylin heard this, he was very surprised and said that he thought they might have met and asked if she had said anything to Ravenna. The girl answered that she had seen her twice, the first time in the street, and the ghost wanted to play with her, and the second time in her room, and the ghost said that Ravenna would die there and that someone would kill her. The dragon asked who exactly was to kill. Her Ravenna said that the ghost didn't go into details and she would like to know too, and decided to ask who the girl was. The dragon replied that it was a very long, convoluted story, and if she wanted to know the truth, she had to promise that if she met her again, that she would not accept the invitation to play. Ravenna asked why she should not accept her invitation, and the dragon said that she would be signing her death warrant. The girl was very frightened because she realized that she was on the verge of death, but whether she could die again was unknown. Ravenna said she still wanted to know who the girl was and how the dragon knew about her. Kaylin said it was a ghost from his past, and Vasis's past. Their story was hard to explain, but still the dragon asked her to trust him at least this time. The girl thought about the fact that he had never looked so vulnerable before, and said that she wouldn't ask him a bunch of questions yet, but eventually she wanted an explanation. Suddenly there was a thunderstorm, and Ravenna saw a ghost girl in the window, which scared her a lot, or maybe it was just her imagination, but the dragon suggested she go to the kitchen. The dragon began to cook, and Ravenna offered to help him. Kaylin asked why he needed her help if he could use magic. And by the way, many people have such skills, but not everyone can control them well. The girl sarcastically thanked him for the reminder, but the dragon did not understand the sarcasm and replied that she could turn to him if she needed to, because she still had some work to do. Ravenna asked if she still needed to learn how to be observant and when he would teach her how to control her power. The dragon replied that she was in a hurry. As always, Ravenna said that at least now he was not as cold as when they first met, and that he was softer. Kaylin didn't answer anything, and so the girl decided to change the subject and ask him how long he had known about the existence of this town, because he seemed to be closely connected to this place. The dragon said he had watched the town blossom. It appeared as a small settlement created for military purposes and used to be a training camp. 200 years ago, when the current royal family came to power, the base was moved, and the families that started the town took up farming. Ravenna was surprised and asked that if he remembered the town from so long ago, how old it was then. But the dragon didn't give a definite answer. The girl asked if he had ever trained anyone else if he was so old, or maybe she was lucky enough to be his first experimental apprentice. Kaylin said that he had another apprentice, and he was strong, even stronger than he was, and that strength made him vulnerable, and there was a dangerous darkness in his heart, and it didn't end well because he suffered and still suffers. So the dragon has high hopes for Ravenna, because despite some dumb tendencies, she shows unprecedented persistence and perseverance. The girl got angry, but the dragon said it was actually a very good quality. Ravenna began to eat, and Kaylin began to look at her and admire her. The main character, she thought to herself that Kaylin was definitely an interesting creature. She had already forgotten how long it had been since she had started her training. She had seen him cooking breakfast using magic, and she wanted to learn the spell he was using, and she was looking forward to the day when he would teach her. The main character wanted to be a normal girl and feel human again, but the dragon always waits for her to learn because he considered it part of the training. After breakfast, she went to her room and noticed the book clasp was gone again. Realizing that this was her chance, she immediately opened the book, but the words from it started moving again, and she didn't understand how she could read now. But then the girl noticed that they are not running away, but rearranged. Seeing these words, the main character was very frightened and she had a headache, although it was not even about the book. The next day, the main character was thinking about what the dragon had planned for today. When she left the room, she wondered what he was doing. The protagonist thought he was ignoring her again, but he was just trying to perfect his own spell. She wondered what the spell was for, and he replied that if his spell worked, it would help him gather a whole staff of magical servants. While the protagonist was shocked by his words, the dragon continued that he would like to create something that could be used for the simplest of tasks, and while it wasn't easy, he hadn't yet succeeded in stripping away the necessary personality. The dragon needs them to be able to function on their own even without his orders, but not to the point where they think they are their own masters. Though the room stank horribly, she decided to clarify that it was possible to create a humanity spell. Although it didn't look very appealing, the dragon poured the mixture on the floor. But when he began to apply his magic to it, the mixture began to form a human form, which surprised the protagonist, because it should be his servant. But unfortunately, when the dragon ordered to put the cauldron back, he did nothing, and realized that it was another failure and turned it back into a mixture. Even though it seemed weird to the main character, it seemed really cool that it didn't even do anything. The experiment was a failure, but the protagonist had a lot of ideas after all. This spell could become very useful, such as domestic servants, delivery men, labor for working in the fields, and even soldiers for the army. She decided to offer her help, hoping that the dragon would teach her the spell. But the dragon disappointed her, because the spell is still under development, and from one wrong move you can get an army of hostile, unruly creatures. The protagonist is disappointed, because today she will not learn anything new either. Apparently the dragon will be busy with his spells all day, and how can he call himself a mentor if he's barely taught her anything useful? Basically, all he does is mock her and tell her that she needs to be observant, and only once did he try to teach her anything. This makes the protagonist's feelings of shame tread on the same ground, and since that's the case, she has to ask him a question. The protagonist thought she might try to learn a new spell, although she didn't realize she was still learning to be more observant, but she hoped it was possible because she could learn something else in parallel. But the dragon rejected that because she wouldn't be able to handle more complicated spells. It was obvious that the protagonist was angry, but still she asked about the basics, because even a beginner without experience has to start somewhere. But he could not teach her the basics because she has no control over her emotions. The protagonist realized that he was a bad teacher because he does not even let her practice. It was obvious that with him she will not go far. And then she remembered for Vizus, because he can also do magic. Then the main character wanted to leave to the one who said that she didn't need the book, but in response, she only wished him good luck with his stupid spell. She hoped Vizus would prove to be more talkative. As she walked toward the tavern, she was still mulling over the dragon, and she hoped that Vizus would be interested in her. But her musings were interrupted by a girl crashing into her. The girl started apologizing to her, but it seemed to the protagonist that it was her fault. The girl realized that remembering her from something made her nervous, but she tried not to worry because this city is very nice as well as the people, but at least she hoped so. The girl remembered that they had met recently, when she asked her to show her the way to the bookstore. Then the protagonist remembered that she had helped her a lot, because in the city it is sometimes very difficult to find something, because they have a lot of forks. But then the girl realized that she was late for work and left. The main character still had a feeling that she didn't get along with other people, but this girl was just a master. When the protagonist reached the tavern, she realized that her last night didn't end well, and she planned to spend the night here and then go back to the dragon and hope that he wasn't angry with her. When she walked in, Vizus said hello to her, but was later greatly surprised that it was her. To be polite, she asked him how he was doing, but the weight of emotion answered what he could do for her. The protagonist thought that she had nothing to blame him for, but she thought he could forgive her, even though they were no longer friends and she didn't live here. But Vizus rejected it, for he had never said such a thing, and he was just surprised that she had come because he had not expected it. His words sounded as if she had moved to another city, but it was almost like that. But still, Vizus was glad she had come. She had expected such a reaction because she was going to leave this place for good. But in her mind, she realized that she was glad that she had decided to come. Vizus wondered where her mentor was, but the dragon was busy with his stupid spell as usual and didn't even notice that she had left. Vizus recognized that sounded rather sad and wondered how she was. The protagonist was fine, but she was frustrated by the fact that the dragon was ignoring her. At this point, Vizus wondered what the spell was. Though the dragon didn't seem to say it was a secret, but if the wrong person heard it, they might have some problems. She lied that she didn't know since he hadn't told her any details. Visis hoped that she might have accidentally noticed some gradients on one of the gradients and rejected it, because the dragon was so engrossed in his work that he hadn't told her anything. Visis wasn't surprised, because the dragon couldn't see anything around him and was always busy with his spells and experiments. At the same time, he tried to touch her face, but she wrestled his hand away and he didn't care about it. But it was just curiosity, because he hadn't heard about his spells for a long time. The last time the dragon had been in town, he had been working on something big. It was some kind of creation magic, and with it you could create new life forms and they would follow the master's orders. The protagonist wondered if he had succeeded, but he rejected it because someone had stolen his work. Most likely it was someone in his inner circle, an apprentice or a servant, for example, and then the dragon left the city. The protagonist realized why he preferred a small house instead of his estate. After a while, Visis decided to find out how they met. It was a very silly story, because when she heard some drunks discussing a dragon that can breathe ice instead of flame, she tried to find it and accidentally stumbled upon the dragon. From these words, Visis was greatly surprised, because how seriously can one search for an ice dragon? Visis still do not know about the power of the main character to demonstrate it and froze the glass. The girl confessed that she can do it, but she can't control it, because she ends up hurting people, which prompted her to search for the ice dragon, hoping that it will help her. But in the end, she found the dragon, and even became his apprentice. Visis wondered what spells he had already taught her to use, but he still hadn't taught her anything, and she knew the spells she knew from the scrolls she had read. She didn't know where to find another teacher, but there were no people running around the city who used magic left and right. But without letting her finish, he said she had come to the right person, because the dragon wasn't the only one with magic. Ravenna thought about Visis's words, that if she had already decided that Kaylin was not giving her enough time and training, she could just find a new teacher. The girl thought about the fact that unlike Kaylin, Visis seemed to really want to help her, and they both had something to offer her. Kaylin was the one she had originally been looking for, and he had done a lot for her and healed her stomach. And without his help, she wouldn't have found the bookstore. But now he was just ignoring her and still hadn't taught her anything, and it was getting on her nerves. On the other hand, Visis was attentive and caring. He empathized with her, but at the same time he flirted with her, which alarmed Ravenna. But that night, when the girl's ghost appeared in the bedroom, she didn't remember exactly, but it seemed that he was in the bedroom. Ravenna didn't know what to do and thought maybe she should work with Kaylin some more. But on the other hand, there would be nothing wrong with learning from more than just one person. The girl was thinking so much that she didn't notice how she fell down, and the thought came to her that she was already becoming like Kaylin. That is, she was walking and didn't even see where she was going and didn't pay attention to anything. Suddenly, she saw the librarian, who smiled radiantly at her and asked how everything was going with the spell book. Ravenna admitted that it wasn't going well because the book was a bit stubborn, and it felt like she was always trying to lock it away. The man asked if the book had let her read even one page. The girl replied that yesterday she was able to read a small passage, but it was very short, and she didn't understand much of it. The librarian asked what it said, because that book had never been opened to her. Ravenna said it was something about a demon with bright red eyes and nothing else. The man said that not much is known about demons, but he has heard from some people that demons are evil witches and mages. But it is impossible to prove. Of course, he also heard that demons are devoid of all reason, has a kind of love for blood, and in his right mind, no one would want to meet them. Suddenly, the girl remembered the story of a man who said that he and his family were going to move. But recently, a witch had flown through the village, and all the men, women, and children had died. The librarian saw the girl falter and decided to ask if she was okay. Ravenna didn't want to tell the man about the story and said she was just wondering why the stupid book refused to open, and Kaylin was busy with some complicated spell and she didn't know how to help him. The man said that she probably needed to read some interesting story and handed her the book. The girl asked if it was another spell book, but the man said it was just a fantasy. This book was about an evil queen who went against an entire kingdom and the knight who stopped her, and there's also a bit of romance in there. Ravenna replied that it sounded really good and agreed to read it. The librarian said she could keep it and have it as long as she wanted, and in that case, she could keep herself busy with something if the spell book didn't open again. The girl thought that it was probably strange, but the book felt warm, and before she met Kaylin, she had only had her mother, but she was gone. So she should thank him for bringing her to this town. Suddenly, the girl saw through the window a girl with red hair that she saw last time. The girl noticed the protagonist and said hello to her, saying she was glad to see her again. Ravenna said that she was just passing by and had never been here before. Bella replied that it was just an ordinary store and nothing fancy, although they had some very good soap. The main character asked Bella how long she had been working here. Bella answered that she had worked here as soon as she grew up, and when she was young, her grandfather opened this store, which is run by the pharmacy behind.